Today on Shifting Views with Willis, we're diving into the remarkable journey of Kari Warberg Block, a woman who transformed from farmer to a pioneering eco-entrepreneur, challenging the traditional pest control industry. EarthKind, which is Kari's company, has grown from a small startup to a multi-million-dollar enterprise, now distributed in tens of thousands of retail locations across the United States. Kari's story is one of persistent resilience, facing initial industry skepticism, overcoming significant financial challenges, and repeatedly being told that environmentally friendly pest control couldn't be commercially viable. Yet, she fought hard, challenged the status quo, and proved her critics wrong at every turn. Kari is a CEO, an author, a speaker, a commentator, a campaigner, and a former advisor to the White House. We're delighted to have Kari on the show. This is Shifting Views with Willis. Okay, Kari, welcome to the podcast. We're delighted to have you here. Thank you for being here.
I'm so happy to be here with you today.
It's great. It's great to have you. Thank you for dialing in all the way from the States. You've had a wonderful journey, and your story really is so inspiring. And I really want to dig into how you've got to where you are now. But I suppose the first thing to do really is to kind of start at the beginning. And you grew up on a farm. You're from a farm life, a rural life. How did that influence your understanding of environmental challenges, but also entrepreneurial opportunities that might come with that? What did farming do to influence that?
So my mother grew up on a farm, and I actually grew up in the city. And I lived in bigger cities like Cherry Hill, New Jersey, Yakima, Washington. It was tiny back then, but it's bigger now, Minneapolis. So for me, picking fruit meant going to the store and picking up a strawberry. But I married a farmer. And right. So that really, it was a lovely thing for me because I wanted to raise kids that way. I thought it would be a great way to raise kids, with values and connected to the land and understanding hard work and health and all of that. And on a side note, this is kind of funny. Most farmers don't marry farm girls; they marry city girls.
Oh, really? Is that
yes,
so?
Because it's a hard life, and a lot of people don't want that kind of life. They would prefer to live in a city and have everything done for them.
Sure.
I'm a big sustainability advocate, so being self-dependent, understanding how to grow food, how to do things yourself with less waste and less fuss was just a lifestyle I really, truly loved. And it really informed where I am today because I'm somewhat of an environmentalist as well. I love nature so much, and it hurts my heart to see nature like destroyed through poisons and through littering and through how it's treated. And it just, it's like desanctifying everything that I hold, sacred. And so
is that what drove you back to the farm then, so to speak? Because you say you grew up in a city, but was it that environmental awareness that other than you've touched about raising your children, but other than that, was it that environmental underpinning that kind of encouraged you to go back to that rural life? Was there an element of that in there?
Yeah, absolutely. It was idyllic for me. It was, connection with nature feels like one of the highest calling of men because we are stewards of this planet, every single one of us. And in the city, even as a small child, I saw how disconnected people were from that sentiment, other than walking in a park. They just didn't share the same philosophies as I did. So I came out like that naturally because my parents didn't make me that,
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. So in terms of that life that you was leading on the rural life, I suppose, you've touched upon earlier on, you're saying that's really hard work to be a farmer or to live that life. It's not like the city life. And you also touched upon earlier on saying that you really wanted your children to understand the environment, and growing up on a rural environment or a farming environment certainly helps inform the way the earth works and where our food comes from and what the weather does and all of these sort of things. Was that something you was really conscious of? And is that something you try to advocate with other parents? You know, it's so important for the young people to really understand how the earth, the ecosystem works.
Yeah, it's really woven into the fabric of EarthKind because we tell that story.
Yeah.
For instance, all of the ingredients in our products are grown on farms and they're ethically sourced. So, taking care of that farmer, giving them contracts a year ahead is something that's really important to me and as farmers, because farmers aren't often appreciated. They follow the programs and they don't necessarily have a say or a voice in policies and things that will affect them. But us as consumers, we have a choice to buy products that support farmers.
Sure.
We have a choice to go to farmers markets, right, and buy our produce that way.
Yeah.
And so our product just gives people another choice. It tells the story. We talk about it on social. I go out into the fields and farms and make videos showing people how cotton is grown, for instance. There's a field not even a mile down the street from my house in North Carolina that I can do that. And I found that when people appreciate something, they're more akin to taking care of it and being thankful for it and realizing, you know, when they spend their dollar in a way that supports something local like that, it's really the power of we, right?
Sure.
They can uplift everything around them and get a great hit of feel good at the same time.
Growing up in that rural environment or being around that rural environment, you must always be conscious all the time of the world around you in terms of, it seems so simplistic, but the fields, the trees, the birds, the wildlife, it's something you're exposed to every single day. And maybe feel a little bit closer to and more at one with because it's part of your everyday seeing. And maybe people that are growing up in kind of concrete jungles and in the city and the digital world and all that sort of stuff, we're seeing less and less people engaging with that outdoor world. Almost, to some extent, some people are so uneducated on it that they don't recognize where food comes from or the fact that it's grown in a field or falls from a tree. They go to the supermarket and they're buying a packet. Are we losing that connection as a species, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's really vital to our health and to our well-being as individuals because that connection actually feeds us. It feeds the vitality of us. The sunlight, the wind, walking on the earth barefoot. You've heard of the amazing benefits of grounding.
Yeah,
sure.
Sure.
It's game changing what happens to us when we're out in nature. In fact, I'll share one funny thing about farmers or eye-opening thing about farmers that most people don't know, including me. And it sets them up. It's really, they're smart. They're really smart. When I married a farmer, I didn't know about global politics. I didn't know even geography, right? There's so many things I didn't know. Well, farmers normally, they talk about these things all the time. They can tell you the presidents in other countries. They can tell you the policies that are happening. They can tell you the markets.
Yeah.
They can talk about supply chain. They can talk about so very many things, partly because their focus is more on, staying in business themselves. And it's a super hard business because you have to grow it. You have to market it. You have to make sure there's money. You have to play the policies. As a farmer, we didn't do that. We went rogue and became regenerative and organic, which was not a thing to do, but it was our belief system and we did that. But
no, I think it's really interesting. And it's interesting that you made that link because I suppose most people would assume, rightly or wrongly, but that those that are living in the rural areas or farmers maybe are disconnected from kind of that sort of thing, geopolitics and what's going on in the world and technology. But of course, all these things fundamentally affect their business and their way of life. And actually, the farming community are such a huge part of the ecosystem, particularly the food ecosystem, that, should that diminish, we would all suffer, right? We would all be in a lot of trouble if the farming community wasn't putting out the produce or growing the crop. And I think often we forget that. We forget that that stuff that's on a shelf that we buy comes fundamentally usually from a farm or from a producer of some sort that works day and night 365 days a year in all weathers to make that happen. And when the environment isn't behaving right and there's a hurricane, a flood, a drought, whatever it is, that affects the crop. Then that affects the food system, and then that affects us in the supermarket and prices and inflation. So all these things are connected, right?
They are. It all starts with the farmer, and it starts with the ground and the earth, and we often forget that.
Yeah.
And, farmers have a really high, one of the highest rates of suicide. And it's just increasingly more and more difficult for them to make a living without playing the the system, so to speak. And they know the system. They're systems thinkers. They have to plan years ahead, as well as, they have to balance the soil and the sky, basically, from everything in between.
Yeah, no, it's really amazing. So let's talk a little bit about EarthKind then, because this is your company, which has been phenomenally successful. Was there really, what was the drive for starting a company like that? Was there a specific experience that made you realize traditional pest control, the methods used were fundamentally flawed? Was there something that happened that sort of said that triggered that moment?
Yeah. It actually started happening as a young child because my father was an entomologist.
Right.
And he went to school for that, get his PhD, and he worked in the pest control industry. And so I had the great fortune as a child to have a room next to his specimen room, like hundreds of spiders and cockroaches and all kinds of things. And it was really freaky to me because, I had an overactive imagination. I was imagining these things come alive and they come and get me. So I never wanted to have a bug near me. Even though it is nature, I'm like, no, I don't want it near me. I don't want it. And I certainly don't want to have to kill the thing and add insult to injury.
Sure.
And when I asked him why he loved insects so much, but on the other hand, his whole work was about killing them.
Yeah.
And he said, it was basically, honey, your stomach is full. You don't need to worry about these things. It's the industry, it's the business that I'm in, it's the business model. That's how we make money. And it never made sense to me, how these entomologists go to college and they love bugs so much, and then they have to kill all of them to make money. So it was really this coexistence, right? How can nature coexist with man without, killing each other, so to speak? Finding peace and harmony between the two. Yeah. And so that was one of the key influencers for me. And the next one was when I married a farmer and I got in a grain truck to drive away, a mouse ran up my leg. And it was like really freaky because it brought all of that back. And I was wearing shorts and it was such a freaky feeling. And he comes running up and he's like, what happened? Because it was quite a commotion and shaking of the truck. And I said, what? A mouse ran up my leg. I'm so freaked out. And he said, it's just a fact of life. There's like no other option out here. Yeah. And I said, well, I have an option. And I had my purse next to me. We're going to town. And I took out a bottle of perfume, which I really didn't wear perfume before. I worked in cosmetics and I'd sell a lot of it, but I didn't like the chemicals and stuff. But I grabbed it thinking I wanted to smell good. Right? So I sprayed that around, and then I saw mice run out of the floorboards, which it was kind of some rusty floorboards in this old grain truck. And it just, I forgot about it, right? Until then the next assault and the next assault. And finally it was like, I have to do something about this because I don't want him near me. I don't want him in my stuff. And I knew I didn't want to kill him. And all the options out there were poison or toxic. Sure. rodenticides in this country kill over 6,000 dogs.
Gosh.
And that's just what's reported. And the ASPCA has found eagles, protected species, then will eat the rodent and then they'll die.
Yeah.
And so there was obvious, an opportunity for change, because 98% of everything sold in this country for pest control in a home environment, right, where there's kids and pets, is toxic and kill.
Sure.
And I thought, wow, I knew I'd never wanted to be a mouthpiece or, get out there and be a Greta Thunberg or something. It wasn't really in my nature. I thought, what can I do to make real change? And it was, well, I've got to invent something. Sure. And then this is the last thing that really helped was I had that seed, and I started to think about ways I could invent something that worked, that was natural. And I had a near-death experience, and I spent a year on my back. Gosh. And I'm like, well, I'm definitely here for something. And I kind of lost the fear. And that's really when I architected kind of the whole thing forward. And that's a pretty important thing for any entrepreneur, is that moment, like you said, that moment of inflection, that what is it that just truly ignited that fire within.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just a spark, isn't it? I mean, I think, so the three kind of scenarios you've described there, it's almost like moments of serendipity. It wasn't one day you were sat at the kitchen table and said, oh, I'm going to start EarthKind. This was a series of events that happened throughout your life, throughout your childhood and into your adulthood. And it's almost like trigger points where they keep coming back, and you're saying, okay, so that's a problem. It's a problem we want to solve, but I don't want to solve it in the usual way, because we know that this causes such destruction to wildlife, but also to the environment and everything associated with it. And then it sounds like to me, it was almost like through experimentation. You pulled out your perfume and you kind of sprayed it around and noticed it had an effect, and you're like, oh, hang on a minute, what's going on there? And that really is entrepreneurship, isn't it? It's discovery, is trigger moments, and then picking up that those things are happening and thinking, hang on, there's something I can do with this. And that's really what's happened here.
Oh, absolutely. Like Sarah Blakely with Spanx, built $1 billion company. She just cut the feet off her pantyhose to, and thought, well, I need something stronger, and started the whole thing. And it's really, I think the best inventions are very much that way. They're born of a practitioner.
Yeah.
And it's sad that more inventions like that don't make it all the way to the market to create the real value and the benefit that the entrepreneur wants, because it can be such a difficult journey. Yeah. But for me, it's been one of discovery the whole entire time. And it's day after day of serendipity. Yeah. And I have notebooks and write things down when things happen, because the universe truly does give you clues. Sure. If you set the intention of what you want to do. And I think it's when you do it with a pure heart as well, and you have a real purpose. I think that purpose gets watered or anointed is if you stay on that path and keep that intention.
Yeah, well, I think it would be good for the listeners, actually, just to, especially the ones in the UK, because EarthKind is primarily a US-based organization. So just to understand what it is that you create. So as I understand it, it's an environmentally friendly pest control. But is this pest control in the same way that we think of pesticides that are being sprayed across crops, or are we talking about prevention of rodents in the house? Can you give like a typical scenario of what it does?
Sure, I'm happy to. So here's actually a sample of one of our products. It's like a sachet, right? An old-fashioned sachet. And what this does is it keeps pests out of an area without killing them or poisoning them. It's a biodegradable, sustainable, humane, highly effective way to keep pests out. So it's
just for the listeners, sorry, Kari, just for the listeners who aren't watching, who are only listening on the podcast. So it's a small plastic bag or you say, is it a plastic bag? It's a small,
No, it's
sachet.
yeah, it's a little fabric pouch.
Fabric
It's a
pouch. Yeah, yeah,
sachet. It's about the size of a hand,
yeah,
and you can place it into the areas where mice might go, or any other group. I'll talk about the other things we have too, but you place them where the pests are going to go and eat or congregate
yeah.
or make a nest. And those are really the only places that pests are looking for in a home or in
Yeah.
stored property, is they
Mhm.
just want to do their thing without being noticed.
Yeah, sure.
So nobody's ever went into pest control in that type of an approach, because normally it's just broadcast spray everything, use
Yeah, yeah,
the poison, do all the stuff
yeah,
to kill them. Where went into what can be really meaningful, and because 90% of the time, if you keep them out of those places, you just eliminated your need to use all the other methods. So
sure, sure.
it saves a lot of money. It saves a lot of time.
Yeah.
They
And
smell
just,
good, and they're top
yeah,
rated, highly effective.
yeah. Sorry, so just for the benefit of the listeners, I use the word plastic. It's not plastic. It's a biodegradable fabric. But in terms of what it actually does, you talked earlier on about the perfume. So is it a scent? It's got a scent on it that drives, that keeps him away. Is
Yeah.
that what it is?
Yeah, it's got a scent. And probably the best story around this is my discovery of how I determined that what rodents were allergic to.
Right.
And this became the patent and became the product that created new policy and kicked off this business.
Yeah.
So I was walking out in a forest, and it was snow covered, and I noticed all the trees, and I was just in the moment of the beauty of it. And I noticed there was a particular tree that had no bark damage. And this is when the rodents were coming out eating bark, because all of wildlife was starved. The deers were eating the bark. I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. Why are there no rodent droppings, or why isn't the
Mm,
bark on this gone? And it occurred to me, maybe there's something in the tree that's
mm,
repelling, because this tree had sap. And
right.
so I started testing, and sure enough, it was a balsam fir tree that repelled rodents. And
Oh
so we
gosh.
got a patent around that, and developed our products. And it's farmers and production workers can go out and they tap the fir trees and get the oil for us. And it's quite a process.
Yeah.
But the other interesting thing is the trees develop that rodenticide or pesticide to keep mice from crawling up and eating monarchs. So monarch
Right.
butterflies, that's their tree that they roost in here in the States during the
Gosh.
summer. And then they fly down to Mexico and they go to a fir forest, a different type of a fir down there. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing I look for when I develop the products. And I just look for that, blinding glimpse of the obvious. Really, that's
Yeah.
what tells me. And then it goes into science and math and all of
Yeah.
those reviews to see if it actually is just a hunch or if it is really something. So it's those interrelationships between nature, because they develop their own over thousands of years. They
Yeah.
develop
Sure.
these resistances, and that's where I look to for each of them. Our spider repellent is our number 2 product, and that smells amazing, and it prevents spiders from making webs. And if they're
Mm.
not in your home building webs to catch their prey, they're going to go somewhere else where they can get food.
Yeah.
Simple as that. So
It's so interesting to me, this, because across nature, across animals and plant life and everything in the ecosystem, they've all developed their own defenses, haven't they? Their own things that they do to survive, to protect, to catch prey, all of these kind of things. And this has evolved over, millions of years, fundamentally, these defenses that have naturally happened. And it's amazingly that I suppose as humans, like you have here, we don't learn more from that. We immediately look for kind of the lab solution, or the synthetic thing that'll kill something. If we don't understand it, destroy it, seems to be kind of the way of the world. When you think, well, actually, these things have been coexisting for forever, for eternity. And then, the humans come along and say, oh, hang on, we don't really like spiders in our house, or we don't like mice or whatever. So let's find the nearest thing we can find to kill it. And that also, but of course, that doesn't solve the problem. It just deals with that immediate effect. And then they just come back. So actually, what we need to do is be learning, well, what does nature do? How does nature deal with, like you're saying about the tree? How does nature stop a rodent coming up the tree? Well, it releases this. Okay, why don't we just use that? I mean, it seems to be such common sense, doesn't it? But we don't really seem to grab onto this, do we?
No, not a lot of people take the time or have the discipline of that ability of focus and awareness, because it takes time and effort to become more aware of those things. And it's interesting because we were the first brand to actually put ingredients on our boxes, and we put them on the front of the box, and we even put it up ahead of our brand name, which was very counterintuitive to what was out there. But I was so committed to this that I want people to know what's in there, right? And I want people to understand how utilitarian nature can be.
Sure.
Right. And we went in, of course, and poisons were $3.95. So here we come out at $12.99 or $14, something like that originally. And everybody thought it's never going to work. You can't do this. And it did work because farmers cared. They cared about their farm dogs. They didn't want them getting into poison, and they certainly didn't want the damage that mice can cause in their tractors and combines. It's $2,000 and up if mice chew on the wires or the wiring harness and the seats. Sure. I bought a $800 used tractor seat once, and because we couldn't afford a brand new one, and it's really, they can do a lot of damage, but yet you don't want them around you because they can carry disease too.
Yeah. No, that's, again, it's really interesting. And I just wonder if the reason we don't search for those natural solutions and try and figure things out that nature has already given us is, going back to our earlier point in the podcast, is because we have such detachment from the natural world. We've evolved into this very insular, digital, everything's on tap. We don't want to be out farming and picking the fruit tree and stuff like that. We just want to buy it from the supermarket. We don't want the hassle, and we'll order it via Amazon. And, everything's just an instant ecosystem. And if there's something we don't like, rodents or pests or something like that, we think, what's the quickest way for us to destroy it rather than actually to try and live with it? And surely that's a reflection of humanity's engagement with the natural world.
Absolutely. Everything we see and live in is a reflection of our hearts. It truly is, and the choices that we make. So for any change to happen around that, it's got to come from us and our hearts, right? And then people got to join together in that. For instance, kids love to get their hands in the dirt. They love to see pollinators. And so supporting our eco teachers, I think, is pretty critical and pretty key. When COVID started, I gathered all my employees on the dock, and I was like, well, I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, folks, but I'll always tell you the truth. And hey, let's make lemonade, right, out of these lemons. What would be something meaningful we could do so I can keep you employed? What would be something really meaningful we could do? And it all came down to, let's support our teachers, because they're the ones that have direct interaction with the kids, and the kids are at home oftentimes, and they really need some help. And so we came up with a program called Harmony Heroes, and we just uplifted the teachers that teach eco programs. So those kids actually got to go in and get their hands dirty and plant pollinator gardens and do things around their school. And those kids learned so much about math and science, and they had so much fun. And kids could get together outside back then, but not in the classroom. And then those teachers were lifted up in their communities. We made a video about it, did press releases. They got on the news. They were able to get grants and more support. But it's hard for people to see or to understand something they can't see with their eyes. They don't take the time they're not processing in that way. So when they saw the kids and how happy they were and how good they were doing in the maths and the sciences, and they saw the teachers that put these programs together, they were like fully on board. And so I think, supporting teachers really can help in that aspect.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And there's nothing quite like learning by doing, is there? And especially things that affect us so fundamentally as how the ecosystem works, how the natural world works, how, flora and fauna, how everything connects, where the food comes from, all of this stuff is so important. And I think back to being a young child, and I suppose back when I was a kid, you were more outdoorsy. You were playing in the mud. It sounds ridiculous, but you were playing in the mud and climbing trees and picking worms out of the soil and chasing spiders and things. You were amongst it. It was because it was part of your life. And then I think as the world's evolved and the digital age has kind of taken over, I think less and less young people are even outside now and breathing the air, walking on the grass, running around the park, just being amongst the environment. And I know there's a stat in the UK, certainly, that I think of the European nations, the UK have become the most detached from the natural world. We have very little engagement with the environment. And we're an island nation, right? We're surrounded by oceans and things. You think none of this makes sense. And so when you're talking about education and teachers, it's got to be so important that we get these kids outside and show them stuff and let them play with stuff and learn. And of course, all the academic stuff, which is what governments are so worried about, STEM and all that kind of thing, well, that's all part of this. The science of how things works, the mathematics of how things grow, that's all part of that journey, isn't it? They're learning and they're communicating and they're sharing and all of that stuff.
And absolutely. And diplomats know this too.
Yeah.
And I didn't know to the extent until I went to Israel earlier this year in January. I went over there for 33 days to help the farmers who had been really devastated and hard hit in the south after the Hamas attack on them.
Yeah.
And I visited a diplomat school. So there's a school over there with hundreds of kids from all over the world. It's a place where diplomats send their kids. It's a nature school.
Right.
It's a nature school. I spent time and I was just blown away. They have gardens and the kids work. The kids work in the gardens, and they don't separate them by age when they're outside. So they're for instance doing activities all the time. It was really fascinating. They look at endangered species of plants, indigenous plants. They learn to identify them. I saw two girls that were about 12 and 13 who were taking cow dung and using it to charge their phones. They were turning it into
the irony of this
electricity.
Yeah.
They look at birds, for instance, over there, which was so exciting for me, was to see these owl houses all over the state. And Stuart, the head of science, and shared with me, they worked on this together, but the owls eat the rodents. I'm like, yes, this is so amazing. So they eliminate the rodents with these owls that come out and eat them. And I'm like, New York City needs this.
Yeah.
You know, what an amazing thing. Instead of all, it
is incredible. And as you touched upon that, and we'll come to this a little bit later because I've got it as one of my talking points for you with regards to your role as a White House advisor. But as you say, diplomats and people in position certainly know this. It's right in front of their eyes, the importance of this environmentalism, sustainability, the ecosystem, green spaces, all of that stuff. But sadly, it's not rolled out on this wide national level, especially in Western countries, so the US, the UK, France, wherever, where we make an active role as part of the curriculum, the education system, to say, okay, fundamental part of this is children need to understand the way that life works, the environment works, because as you said at the start, we are just kind of keepers of the land for the time that we're here, and then we're off, and then somebody else comes along, So why is that? Why is that not rolled out a national thing? If diplomats recognize it, what's the problem?
Yeah, well, I think the key is entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
There's an ecosystem, and you have your government, you have your entrepreneurs. There's so much support. I don't have like all of it right in front of me, but I've looked at this, really carefully. And entrepreneurs play a really key role. And I see that very much like nature too, because when circumstances change, nature must evolve to survive.
Yeah.
And it works on the power of contribution. Someday I'll write a book around this. But like just as every niche has its role, or every organism has its niche in an environment, we need to think about human population and human health in the same way, because entrepreneurs play a very, very important role in bringing things out to market. And it's like a capitalist mindset, so to speak. Yeah. But entrepreneurs generally will do it out of their passion and their gifts that they're contributing. Like I did. Nobody else could have started my business in quite the same way I did. Sure. But I went harvesting deep inside me, going, well, what do you have? What really irks you? What do you have to leverage out there? And I didn't have a voice at the time. I was scared to even, I would have dropped out of high school had I had to join speech class. But it really changes when you have a driving purpose inside of you. And in my case, I went and I worked with the government, which isn't always the case. I didn't say, you're bad. I went in and said, I think this needs to change. I want to create a new process and new policy so that this industry can take off. And I showed them this can be a good thing long term, good for your own kids, right? Your own family. Are you willing to work with me? And I worked with universities to do the research and the study and the trials. I worked with several universities. I worked with my own county and my own state, and I worked with the USDA as far as securing grants, because we were living on $18,000 a year when I started this. It was just nothing but it could have been called a grandiose vision, but I thought, maybe this little farm wife from Western North Dakota can actually make a dent. And so every day I just took another step and looked at that ecosystem of all of the, I saw it as a collaboration, right? And it was different because, here's one case, an example. We came up with the first bioplastic to be commercialized here. Wow. And I did that with our North Dakota State University and a materials scientist who had been working on this. And John Deere was in with it, Toshiba, Bobcat. They all went in on this research to develop this product. And none of us were scared to share the patent rights, right? So we just worked out an agreement to do that. And that's really, really rare, because oftentimes innovation stops there. It's like, who owns the patent rights? And then it ends up shifting up to only the biggest companies. So it's that collaboration is really important, and to find the win-win for that to happen. But if that happened, I think we'd already have sustainable cities all over.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think that's really interesting, because I think that's certainly what stifles innovation and what stifles entrepreneurship. I think you're right. I think if you used to define what an entrepreneur was, it's someone who's driven by passion to find solutions to whatever their passion is, to solve problems, basically. And they come up with the most creative and innovative ways, and sometimes the most simple ways. Sometimes it's not about science or technology. It's just about a simple idea and somebody saying, why couldn't that happen? And then driving that forward and having the tenacity to do that against what is often significant adversity, because it's hard to be a business owner. It's hard to be a startup, certainly hard to be an entrepreneur and convince major corporations or even government to say, listen, I've got this thing, I think it's great, we should do this. Sometimes, because you can't even get in the room for a lot of people, it's almost impossible. So it really is about tenacity, isn't it? Is that, and that's why we need entrepreneurs, and it's why we need innovators, and we need to drive them and help them, because they're giving us the solutions, right?
Oh, absolutely. And there's ecosystems for entrepreneurs too that I've been involved with. Ernst and Young, who identifies and celebrates entrepreneurs all over the world. I happened to win an entrepreneurial winning woman in 2012, and they've been really helpful at making connections, opening doors. There's over 100 of us now, women around the world, that are making our dreams come true and leaning on each other for support when we need it. Because sometimes you just can't get that appointment, and you need to get in the room, and you just need a little help so you can go in there and do your "I'm better, I'm faster, I'm cheaper" whole thing.
Yeah. Now you're in the position now, or have been for many years now, where you've got this incredibly successful brand, EarthKind, which is all over the United States. It's a multi-million-dollar organization. Given where you came from, so that kind of, I think I read somewhere that you described yourself as a farmer turned CEO. What were the most significant challenges for you, would you say, transitioning from that agricultural life, if you like, to running a multi-million-dollar business?
Yeah.
Because it almost sounds like yin and yang, doesn't it? It sounds like, the natural life, and and then it's like corporate America almost, and you've kind of bridged the gap between the two. Are you able to separate yourself from the two entities, or do you find it easy to merge them? How does that work?
Yeah. Well, a couple things with the farm. I loved it, and I had to make a choice to leave it because I couldn't build this business by staying on the farm. I knew I had to give up the growing to other growers, right? I knew I'd have to get on planes to go places and do things. I knew if there was any hope for us, I had to manufacture it. Back then, everybody manufactured in China, and people told me I was nuts. Like people on Shark Tank, I wasn't on there, but like, you're nuts. You need to manufacture it in China. But I wasn't willing to compromise. So I had to do everything here and learn how to do it. And my farmer husband even said, "I'm not in this, Kari. I'm sorry. I'm just not in this. I don't want to do this." He just wanted to farm. He didn't want to see me traveling all the time. So we parted and went our separate ways. That was really difficult because I felt like, oh my God, I lost my mechanic, right? My machine mechanic, if anything would go wrong. And then, I ended up moving to cities, and it wasn't and still isn't my favorite place, but I'm still surrounded by nature where I am. And I always make sure there's grass under my feet. Even when I travel, find a hotel that has a walking trail, that has grass around it. Oftentimes they're older facilities, but I don't care. I got to be able to open a window and do that. But yeah, over the years, from going to doing everything yourself to hiring your first couple employees, right, and delegating and working on sales, and then it moves into when you get past 10 million, all of a sudden it's like all done through a team, and your leadership is what's most important there. Fortunately, I've always been able to inspire people, which helps, as a leader that's being inspiring. And I'm more on the people side than the profit side, which I think helps. We're a top place to work, which is really great. We won number one this year in top place to work and the work-life balance.
Right.
Because I'm pretty much a leader that's speaking like this all the time. We take all the employees' kids to a science center and teach them about nature and go on nature walks and things like that. It's one of the favorite benefits. And we call it Act 1 and Act 2, and they're just as important. You need to go home to Act 2 and be your best self. I want to send my people home happy so that they can do the best they can and their families. And recently this year, we had a kind of a culture workshop, and I was really surprised, but deeply humbled to see that the employees think of themselves as leaders.
Yeah, yeah.
So being a leader that actually reflects this is now the type of leader I think is needed in this country today. And when you read the articles, you can see it. This command and control does not work.
No, no.
There's a mass exodus of CEOs happening right now.
Yeah.
And because what it takes to get employees and the top talent, they want a leader that's visionary, that's authentic, that's collaborative, right? That wants to win in the right ways, not win at all cost.
Yeah, yeah, Kari, we talk about this all the time in the line of work that I'm in. I work in sort of the innovation world, but I work with so many organizations. And the biggest thing we talk about underpinning all of the stuff is culture. We say it's culture, 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 and that comes from the top. It comes from the leadership. And it's all the words you've just said, it's authenticity and visionary and genuinely understanding your employees and their lives and what they're experiencing. If you want to get great work from them and you want them to believe in your mission, they've got to want to be there. They've got to feel good about being there and believe in what it is that they're doing. And I think, what makes a really good leader is someone who genuinely is underpinned by their principles, who goes in and says, look, this is what this was when I first started it, and this is why I did it. And now it's a multi-million-dollar organization, but the principle still remains the same. It's exactly what it was when I was sat at my kitchen table. It's exactly the same principle. The only thing is now it's just going out to a bigger audience. And we need more people to make that happen. But you're all part of the same journey. And I think that's a really inspirational message to put out as a leader.
Yeah, well, thank you. And it's such an important message that you're the first person to hear this in public. Our press release isn't even out. But I hired a CEO who started just a little over 3 weeks ago. So I'm graduating into the role of exec chair.
Yeah.
So I'll be responsible to continue to fund this growth.
Yeah.
And I'll be getting out, speaking more about our company and about how important it is to, I think it is to live sustainably. And people are really hungry and needing this. And so to kick it off, I did another thing very unconventional. I checked myself into a holistic health institute for 3 weeks.
Wow.
And it's like a whole immersion into 100% sustainable living. All of the food is grown there locally. It's all organic. So you eat like that. It's all positive thoughts, mind shifts, total digital detox. And it was a really great way to separate. Okay, my baby's 18. It's graduated.
Yeah.
I super trusted the guy that I hired because I've been working with him for over 12 years, and he's helped me on various initiatives as a consultant, and just raised his hand. And he's been a CEO before, and my people are thrilled. And it was a great place to leave my company and start this new path.
Oh, really? So it's an exciting journey ahead then. It'd be great to see where that goes. But of course, that gives you the freedom then to be able to, do what you're doing now, speak to people, spread the word, not just about what EarthKind's doing and all the wonderful work you're doing there, but just about the wider issue around sustainability, ecosystem, understanding how the earth works, educating our youngsters into this world, all of that kind of stuff. And it leads me nicely to my next question, which I had for you, which was around, you've essentially been recognized for your development of this innovative product around eco-friendly pesticide use, if you like, or pest control. But what impacts do you think that'll have on individual consumer choices moving forward? We're in a very consumerist world. We're still going for the instant win to get the quick kill stuff or whatever. How do we shift views on that? How the way that people think about sustainability in their own lives? Is that really what your mission's about?
Yeah, absolutely. It was really this, how do you change the way people see pests and deal with pests?
Yeah.
And I think doing it in tandem is something that's always been really important to me. And our growth has been slower because it's so much about the purpose and the education. But a incredible thing happens once about 5% market penetration happens. That's when I call it vultures swoop in. But
Yeah.
that's when you know it's no longer a trend. You know that there's been a consumer shift. And
Mm,
this is something I watch really closely is when is that consumer shift point? When does it become a new habit and new behavior?
yeah.
Right. And it takes, like, I just went through this 21-day detox, like whole thing, because it takes 21 days to set a new habit. And it can
Mm,
take 21 years or 21 months, excuse me,
mm,
to actually make that a routine habit. So
sure.
the way we engage with their customers has to be such that they trust us like a family, right? They trust us and that we're there for them and they know that we're there for them, irregardless if they like our product or not.
Mm,
I think that that really matters. So we were really the first brand to come into this space that it wasn't just you buy this and you kill it. It was more about a relationship
sure.
with our customers and then their relationship with nature.
Mm,
And so it was kind of a big uh, elephant, right? You just take one little bite at a time to eat it.
yeah.
But the penetration now is 15%. Not us, but Procter and Gamble came into it. SC Johnson came into it. They still have a kill method and aerosol cans and that, but hey,
Mm,
it's one step closer. And
yeah,
it takes
absolutely.
a village, right, to
Yeah.
get people there. But it now sustainability, everybody says they want it. 90% of
Sure.
the people do. They want to reduce our trash impact on the landfills. They know we're out of space, all of that.
Yeah.
They're worried about the climate.
Yeah.
But it's the point of making it easy for a consumer.
Yeah. It's
Because their
sometimes not knowing
attention.
what to do, isn't it? I find because I've certainly done some work in this space around the green arena and trying to shift behaviors about the way that we think about our everyday lives, what we consume, what we buy, what we use, everything, it all ties into the earth fundamentally. Um, and, you know, often people will say, I do care. I'm very aware that there's a problem and we all need to play our part in that, certainly. I just don't know what to do. What do
Mm,
I recycle, I put my things in the recycle bin and I try to do this and I try not to waste food, the everyday tiny little behaviors. But I think people seem sustainability and climate change as such grand, massive events that it's bigger than them and they're just trying to survive their daily life and pay the bills and send the kids to school, and it's
mhm.
too mammoth. And I think what you're saying is like you can't just throw this stuff at people and expect them not to be engulfed by it. You kind of need to hold their hand and slowly take them through this journey, showing them
Yeah.
the way. And it comes from education, from new products and innovations, but also through just talking leadership.
Oh, absolutely. And our brains can't handle this because our brains naturally go to 50 priorities all at once.
Yeah, yeah.
And you have to hold somebody's hand and their heart, right, to make
Mm,
that full connection that, okay, well, let's do this 1% thing, right? Take one step. And then after they see it, like with our product, we have super high loyalty rate, many customers for life. But they saw how good it worked and they saw how easy it was. And they're like, why didn't I think of this idea? I could have done this. It was like this aha, where they're like, wow,
yeah,
this isn't as hard as we think it was, right?
sure.
But they almost have to see it with their own eyes to believe
Yeah.
it. So that's where the power of community is really important. And I know myself as a leader is one of the keys for me moving into more of speaking on platforms and
Mm,
directly talking to people from my heart,
yeah.
right? That when you see a successful person or a leader or movie stars, right, or football players or whatever doing something, you want to do it too.
Mm,
And so I just hope to be a good role model for sustainability and more practical ways that are good for the planet,
sure,
and
sure.
good for us too.
Yeah. Well, you certainly do that because it certainly comes across as incredibly authentic and passionate and genuine. And so much so that when I was researching for this podcast, I intentionally didn't list in questions around sort of the specifics of your business, because you're so successful, and I could easily start talking to you about market shares and all the retail places you're in and all the money you make and all of that kind of stuff. But the vibe that I got from all the research I was doing on you was it's not really what her priority is. It's there, and it helps. Having that obviously is because she's worked hard, she's built a great business, but having that helps her to keep growing that business, and it gives her the sustainable financial backing and things to be able to do that. But actually, that's not really what's driving the message. The message I get from her is a much deeper level. It's a much more human level, which is I feel that this is something that we need to be talking about and finding solutions for. And we're all responsible for the earth in some way or other. We all have our role to play, and let's try and help each other do that. And that was really the vibe I was getting across, which is why I didn't really want to talk about too much about the business, if you like, of what you do, even though EarthKind is so successful. So I think for you moving forward, when you talk about going out on platforms and speaking and trying to educate kids and all that kind of stuff, it seems like the natural direction, and maybe more leaders in your position should be doing that.
I think so. I think in time, especially the young kids coming up, like the Gen Zs, I mean, wow.
Yeah.
They're buying my book. I wrote a book called Gathering Around the Table for Purpose-Driven Change Through Business, and it's through Conscious Capitalism Press. And I go on in there. It's really a guide for decision-making from a place of values.
Wow.
And I get asked a lot of questions. What's the next step? What should I do? And I just say, look within, right? What pains you about the world, and make decisions from that place of values, and you won't go wrong.
What's interesting is I think there's a quote, and I don't know if Einstein actually said this, but it's suggested that he said this. But either way, the quote is still true, which was he said if I had an hour to save the world, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. And I found that so profound. It was like, if you just sit there and think about it and ask yourself deeply what really matters, actually it's blindingly obvious, but you've got to want to look for it, and you've got to really want to take the time and have that conversation. And so often we're looking for that drop of sugar, aren't we? The quick wins, make the money, get the stuff, get the convenience, whatever, luxury, comfort. But sometimes these things are right in front of your eyes, and that's why it's often common sense, but it's really about your intention and whether you take the time to actually ask yourself the question, isn't it? And I think sustainability is definitely part of that.
Yeah. And I mean, simple things like asking yourself the question with your bare feet on the ground, the current and the energy and the vitality of that is so, there's all kinds of science on it. It's like amazing what it does to get rid of the noise in your brain. And taking hikes, any adventurer will tell you their best idea came when they were taking a shower, right, in the water, or when they were taking a hike or out on the grass or in nature somewhere. And it really is powerful to coming up with those solutions and quieting that noise, because 95% of our thoughts are negative as humans. But that 5%, wow, we can do a lot with that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Kari, so we have to mention just before we close up a little bit of business, because you are a leader, you've been successful, you're an entrepreneur. For the next wave of entrepreneurs that are coming through, and you've touched about this earlier on, saying that you do work with these, especially those that are trying to do ethical things or sustainable outputs, what advice would you give them? Because they're going to face adversity, aren't they, and challenges to try and push their idea forward. How have you overcome that, and what would you advise them to do?
Well, I think probably the most important thing is when you come up with the first time you come up with an idea, like as a pioneer, people are going to think it's radical. They're going to think it's not true. People said that is stupid. Nobody would buy this, like over and over and over. It was literally years. I had to face this. It was like almost humiliation, where people were, that's stupid. Well, maybe I'll help her because she's nice. But to get people really to believe in it, you have to really learn how to communicate from the heart. And that often, even if they don't believe in you at the time, that gives them permission to do the same. When they see this authenticity of like someone like me walking into the pest control category, you
Mm.
know, before you had to have a PhD. There's this whole hierarchy and this elite thing to it. And here
Yeah.
comes this farm wife with no real college education at the time, wasn't poised. I didn't wear the suits,
Mm.
but I knew my facts and I knew what was in my heart. And I just had this conviction, I'm going to do it with or without you. I'd rather do it with you. I
Yeah.
think understanding that is so important for any entrepreneur going against the grain.
Mm.
Anybody really going against the grain is speaking your truth, because everybody has the right to do that.
Yeah.
And that'll give them permission. But in time, once you get one win, it gets easier, because then people think, oh, she's a genius, like for me. So
Yeah.
I've been fortunate to have 3 market winners, which is always
Yeah.
my goal. If I could have 3 brands, 3 real solid market winners, I could, call it a day. So, I'm really happy about that. But each one, actually, it can get harder because people have different expectations.
Sure. Sure.
And
Yeah.
your retailers are seeing the money.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
if it fails, it's kind of oops. But you have
Yeah.
to just pick yourself up and keep trying. It's better to try and fail, because you learn so much along the way. Every single failure, every single no for me became fuel.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fastest way to failure is to do nothing, right? And that's it. So you might as well be throwing it out there. And it's so, it sounds very I can't think what the word is, but when you're sort of thinking about, or almost philosophical, where you're sort of saying, look, you have this very short time that you have on this earth, that your natural life. If you're lucky, maybe you've got 80 years or something if you wear a seatbelt and you look after
Yeah.
yourself the best you can. But that's probably what you've got. And in that time, you've got to do something. You've got to believe in your passions. You've got to try things out. You've got to have a go, because if you don't, why else are you here? You might as well be doing that, and you will get pushback. There will be adversity. People will laugh. People will tell you can't do it. But the best successful entrepreneurs are way above that. And I suppose you're testament to that, and that's really the message you're trying to put out to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Life is a precious thing. It's not to be wasted.
Yeah. Then finally, just before we wrap up then, Kari, I just wanted to touch upon other influencers that are out there. In our pre-call, you'd mentioned you'd had some chats with Gary Vee, who many of the Gen Z and Gen Millennials will know as a sort of visionary speaker, really, for entrepreneurship, and makes a lot of noise about that kind of world. Do you think influencers like that really have a role? The social media influencers, are they shaping the way that people are feeling?
Yeah, Gary is a true visionary. I happen to think he's really prophetic as well. I heard him speak in 2011, and I immediately went home, got on all the social channels. We were one of the first out there, because I could see, when I heard him talk about the vision of where things were going, I saw all the practical reasons that it's going to have to go that way.
Yeah.
And today, I mean, I'm so happy to see how successful he is. And, our company actually works with one of his companies, and he's become a friend and a great champion and supporter for me and our brands, because of our values. He believes in kindness, that kindness is underrated in business. And he wants to
Yeah.
be a kind leader like me. And he sat in so many boardrooms listening to things about how to win, right? He's an advisor. And he's like,
Yeah.
you ought to try being kind to people.
Yeah.
You really can win that way, but there's this war mentality, right?
Yeah.
And both of us share this more of a peace mentality.
Sure.
And
That's so, yeah. No,
his
sorry. I was just going to say it's so refreshing just to hear you say those words, just to say, be empathy is the key, is the word, and being nice and understanding. And it always creates so much more good, doesn't it?
Yeah. And Gary's newest book, Day Trading Attention, is killer good. Yeah, I wrote a whole marketing plan from that. And it was like, wow. In the past, you would have had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to get that kind of advice. And he actually wrote it for his own employees to read so they could better serve their clients, but he made it available to the public. So entrepreneurs have more tools at their hand than ever before, like social media.
Yeah.
You know, singers and musicians, they can play something and become an overnight sensation.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And I guess that's the point. We're not in what you're talking about with the environment and being grounded and things like that. We're not dismissing technology. Technology is incredible. We're able to have this call now because we're using Zoom and all these things, and this stuff exists. And if we can work with it to create good, then that's wonderful. That's exactly what we want to do, But it really is about still following that passion, having that kindness, really just having that genuine, authentic belief in yourself and wanting to do something good with it. And I think that's what's wonderful about EarthKind. And certainly shout out to Gary Vee as well for all the stuff that he's done, because he's another influencer. But all the other influencers that are out there that are really sort of, they've become successful, but they're using it in a really strong, positive way to try and influence the way the world evolves and the way we as humans behave, so that's really wonderful. Moving forward, Kari, are we going to see EarthKind in the UK? Are we going to see you over in Europe, or the products that you're putting out?
Yeah, we've got some relationships, and we're definitely working our way that direction.
Oh, that's great news.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people from the UK come to our website and have for years.
Oh, really? That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, because again, the more that we can spread the awareness of what's actually available out there and the choices we can make, obviously, the better. We want to kind of get more and more people across the planet doing this. So that's really wonderful.
100%.
Yeah. Yay. Kari, this has been so interesting. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I've really, really enjoyed this. I think it's inspiring what you're doing. I think the journey you've had is inspiring. And I think the products that you create only create good, and that's a wonderful thing. And the more we can be in tune with what's going on with sustainability in the earth, the better for all of us. So kudos to you, and thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. I adore you. You're just amazing, Wayne.
Oh, bless you. God bless you. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.